Hello everyone, and you're all very welcome to the second session in our new client experience webinar program. We're delighted that you can be with us today. My name is Niamh O'Connor and I'm part of the client experience program team here at Dentons. As you know, our client experience webinar program continues to be focused on bringing you practical insights on some of the biggest issues and opportunities facing you and your in-house legal team. Today's topic is very much at the top of corporate agendas right now, and over the next 90 minutes, we're going to deep dive into some of the key trends our panel believes that you and your in-house legal team need to know about the procurement, deployment, and use of AI. But before we do that, we're keen to get your input and views on a recent survey that our UK, Ireland and the Middle East firm have carried out. With lots of noise and headlines focused on AI, we commissioned a piece of research to better understand where exactly the leaders of large international businesses are on their AI adoption journey. We surveyed 450 C-suite executives and general counsel. The report finds that while business leaders believe that AI will transform their business, there is a significant gap between AI ambition and action. And this report explores closing that gap by gaining AI traction across a number of key areas. We would love all of you who've joined us today to have an opportunity to input into this report. So with that in mind, we're going to get really stuck in right at the outset, and we're going to carry out 4 polls right now that we would love you to participate in. The report itself will be launched in early November of this year. If you'd like a copy, please drop us a note at cxprogram@dentons.com, and we will automatically share the results and commentary from today's polls with you all in early November. So let's get started. So you should all be able to see the first poll now. The first poll focuses on your internal strategy for AI. So does your organization currently have an AI strategy or roadmap for AI and technology? Maybe you already have one in place. You might be in the process of implementing it. Maybe not yet, but you really see the need to implement one. Or perhaps you don't think one is needed. Excellent. It's great to see lots of participation already. I'm going to give a few short seconds for everyone to indicate which option best describes their current situation. So let's go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 on this one. I am going to end the poll and share the results with you all. So yes, in the majority of cases, 47% of you are in the process of implementing an AI strategy or roadmap. Okay, so let's go to our second poll. So this poll focuses on corporate agility, and by that we mean building strategic and operational capacity to quickly adapt and respond to the opportunities presented by AI. So in thinking about a 3-year time horizon, which of the following approaches is your organization most likely to take to enhance its AI capabilities? Do you see your organization engaging in M&A? Will you license? Are you more thinking that you will buy a third-party AI solution as a service? Perhaps you might be considering taking a minority stake in an AI organization. You may be considering building a solution internally, or you may not know. And again, it's lovely to see lots of us getting involved in this one. I'm going to do a short countdown and let's share the results with you all. So let's go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 on this one. I'm going to end the poll and share the results with you all. So quite interesting on this one, and I'm sure lots of food for thought for our panel, who will, I'm sure, be delighted to get stuck into discussing and integrating the results of this one. So 47% of you will buy third-party AI solutions as a service. Okay, let's go to our third poll. So our next question focuses on workforce transformation. So first of all, thinking about how has workforce productivity changed since the start of your organization's adoption of AI tools. So here, an estimated percentage of increase in productivity. Do you see that between 1 and 5%, 6 and 10%, 10%, more than 10%? Perhaps you see no change. And then on the flip side of that, we'd also love if you feel it's actually decreased. And again, it's lovely to see everybody getting involved in this one. If anyone's feeling particularly ambitious or particularly engaged in these polls this morning, we've put in a little bonus question at the end if you scroll down. So with this one, we are keen to get your views on whether or not you're primarily implementing AI to reduce overall headcount and outgoing costs, or to create an augmented workforce, boosting growth through productivity gains. And wow, it's excellent to see everybody getting involved, particularly thinking about the second question there. Very interesting. Let's go 3, 2, 1 for any final contributions. We will end the poll and share the results with you all. So most of you seeing an increase already when it comes to workforce productivity of between 1 and 5% or no change. And really exciting, I think, to see that most are focused on creating an augmented workforce and boosting growth through productivity gains on this particular one.
Thank you very much, and hi everyone. Apologies for the technical issues, but I guess that tells us something about the risks associated with this amazing technology that all of us are in the precipice of rolling out at our organizations. So I'm Antonis Patrikios. I'm a privacy cyber and AI partner based in London. I co-chair the firm's global privacy and cybersecurity group and the firm's global TMT sector. It's my pleasure today to be chairing this panel for you. And as you can see, we have a great representation of the firm's global privacy, cyber and AI group. I'll briefly introduce everyone and briefly set out the agenda. So from Colombia, Latin America, we have Juanita Costa, who leads our privacy, cyber and AI practice in Latin America. From Europe, Italy, Milan in particular, to distinguished colleagues, Chiara Bocchi, a counsel in our previous cyber and AI team there, and very actively involved in our AI initiatives and advisory, and also Mr. Giangiacomo Olivi, a partner in the same office, who, among his other hats, also leads our AI working group, our global AI working group. From London, my good partner, Dan Burge, one of our most experienced commercial technology lawyers, who is going to convey to us insights from what we see in the European market, all the way across the world to Australia. Robin Chatwood from Melbourne, Australia, the chair of our previous cyber and AI group in APAC. And last but not least, Todd Aubert from Washington, DC, the world's capital, and the lead of our US practice, who for this session is also going to cover North America more broadly. So what we're going to do over the next 70 minutes or so is we're going to look at the emerging key trends, themes, and key issues that we see in the market in relation to the procurement and deployment of AI for global organizations. Most of you will know that there are very rapid developments on the legal, regulatory, and best practice framework around the world. So we will start for around 20 minutes with a quick tour of the world. It's almost around the world in 20 minutes in order to convey to you a snapshot of what is happening in the legal and regulatory framework. And then perhaps we will turn to the meatier parts of this session. We're going to do a relative deep dive on the key issues and the market trends that we see when procuring AI. And I think it's very telling that in the survey that we run, 47% of you said that you intend to buy AI. That's your way into the AI revolution. And another 19% suggested that they would license AI. So clearly, the procurement element is really, really important. And after we've done that, then we're going to focus on the deployment and use of AI. So what are the key issues that we're seeing in the market around these activities? There's not enough time to cover everything. This is a very big topic, but our experts are going to single out the most important elements for you. As always, we very much look forward to your comments and your questions. So please feel free to use the chat room, share experiences or ask questions, and Niamh and myself will pick them up and we'll address them to our panelists who will hopefully be able to answer them. So without further ado, let's begin our tour of the world in terms of legal and regulatory developments. We will start with Australia and we'll travel westbound. No, it's actually eastbound. My apologies. So Robin, over to you. What is happening in APAC and Australia in particular?
Well, there's a lot happening. So basically, it's a combination of, guidance being put in place. So some of the, softer approaches to it. We've also got jurisdictions, such as, Korea, Vietnam, Thailand, and Philippines, Australia included, who actually have produced some draft laws that are out for consultation or before parliaments and governing bodies at the moment. And then we've also got some hard law already in place. So, for example, in the guidance category is China. They've also got some law. So they've got an AI law making its way through the legislative process. And then they've got, various sectoral and municipal regulations in place. In Singapore, they produced one of the first AI governance frameworks in Asia that started in 2019 with voluntary based guidance, based on two fundamental principles. Really, decision-making processes should be explainable, transparent, and fair, and AI should be human-centric. In India, they also have some AI governance principles which are built on the OECD principles. Japan have also got non-binding guidelines. Korea, by contrast, has got a draft act before Parliament. They've got actually two things before Parliament. So one is an AI industry framework for establishing trustworthy AI. And that's essentially going to be a consolidated body of law, incorporating 7 different AI-related bills that have been introduced into Parliament since 2022. And some of the things that are included in that is advance notice to users for high-risk areas of AI and some certification requirements. There's also some guidelines available there. Indonesia, they've got an electronic agent law where AI is regulated under their Electronic and Information and Transactions Act. They've also got a national strategy on artificial intelligence since 2020, and they've got 2 guidelines on, basically regulating the ethics of in place. Australia have produced a voluntary framework a while ago. Now they've produced some voluntary guardrails, and they've got a draft out for consultation on mandatory guardrails. And so that's only been released. That's very new. That happened in the last month or so. New Zealand doesn't look like, they're the kind of the outlier that they're not going to be, producing a standalone AI Act anytime soon. There's Vietnam has got a draft law. Thailand have got 2 draft laws. And the Philippines have regulated for a while now through their Data Privacy Act that data subject consent is required for decisions with legal effects concerning a data subject made solely on the basis of automated processing. And then there's 3 bills before their parliament dealing with AI specifically. So that's APAC.
Thank you, Robin. So a lot happening in APAC, several laws that are actually enforced and many more coming online. So contrary to perhaps common perception and perceived wisdom, There's a lot happening outside Europe, and APAC being this very, very large, very diverse region that obviously creates some challenges in terms of taking consistent approaches across the region. So thank you very much for that. Surely things must be simpler in the EU because, of course, we have a consolidated or a harmonized or approximated framework. So, Chiara, over to you. What is happening in the EU?
So we have the AI Act and many other EU regulations and directives which are relevant for AI. The AI Act is the first ever comprehensive legal framework on AI worldwide. It is a product safety regulation, as we all know. It aims to ensure that AI is safe and trustworthy at the time when it is put in the European market and for its full life cycle. And the AI Act has a risk-based approach, meaning that the higher the risk, the strictest the requirements that apply to the AI systems. The AI Act already entered into force on 1st August, and it will be fully applicable 2 years later with some exceptions. Prohibitions will take effect after 6 months. The governance rules and the obligations for general purpose AI models will become applicable after 12 months. And the rules for AI systems that are embedded into regulated products will apply after 36 months. But the good news or the bad news is that we are not done with AI. The AI Act is a complex piece of legislation. Providers and employers are not left alone. The European Commission must indeed develop not less than 30 guidelines. This is just a rough estimate, code of practice, codes of conduct. And this text will cover various key aspects of the AI Act and of regulating AI, like, for example, obligations for general purpose AI models, technical documentation, and the fundamental rights impact assessment. Works have already started to draft the code of practice for the providers of general purpose AI models and the general purpose AI models with the systemic risk. The code of practice will detail the AI Act rules for such categories of AI systems and it aims at facilitating the application of these rules of the AI Act for general purpose AI models. The code of practice will cover mainly transparency, copyright, risk assessment, mitigation measures, and providers, they should be able to rely on the code of practice to demonstrate compliance, of course, with the AI Act. The rules of the code of practice will apply if it is finalized 12 months after the entry into force of the AI Act. And in this context, the AI office is working as a sort of facilitator to ensure that the code of practice effectively addresses the AI Act rules. The final version of the code of practice will be published and presented in a closing plenary in April 2025. And the closing plenary will give also the opportunity to the general purpose AI model providers to participate and to express their views as to whether or not they would envisage to use the code of practice and to adhere to the code of practice. And after publication of the code, there will be also an assessment of the adequacy of the code of practice by the AI office and the AI board. And the commission, finally, the commission will decide whether or not to approve the code of practice. And if the code of practice is not deemed adequate, the commission will provide further rules. But there is also more. To facilitate, again, the transition to the full application of the AI Act, the Commission has just launched the AI Pact, which is a voluntary initiative that seeks to support the implementation of the AI Act. It is a voluntary set of commitments or pledges to which providers, deployers, companies can adhere to start applying the principles of the AI Act ahead of its full entry into application. And the AI Act also aims at enhancing the engagement between the AI office and all the stakeholders, including civil society and academia as well. And this set of voluntary pledges call on the companies that are participating to the AI Act to commit to at least 3 sets of core actions, like adopting, implementing an AI governance strategy, mapping, high-risk AI system and promoting AI literacy, of course, and awareness among the staff, employees, aiming at ensuring, again, a safe and responsible development of the AI. And it is also possible to commit to additional pledges, which focus on human oversight, risk mitigation, and transparency, like labeling certain types of AI content. To date, over 100 companies have signed the pledges, and these companies include also small and medium enterprises, not only big groups of companies. And there will be in 12 months a public report for these companies, for these adhering entities to report on the commitment and on their journey towards the full application of the AI Act. Joining the AI Act is a great opportunity to work with the Commission and to build a common understanding of the objectives of the AI Act while taking also concrete action to go towards the full application of the AI Act. And finally, in terms of future action, future initiatives, we have also to remember the Liability Directive and the new Product Liability Directive, which will provide rules on the liability side, not on the, let's say, they will not have an ex-ante approach trying to prevent risk. They will try to provide instruments to react to the risk in case something happens, in case damages happen.
Thank you, Chiara. So in a nutshell, a lot happening, and you didn't even go into the fact that obviously the EU AI Act and all the accompanying high volume of codes of conduct and all the guidance that's going to come out is just one part of the EU's regulation of digital services, which is really, really comprehensive. Let's hope that the EU AI Pact is going to produce practical insights for organizations and we see this as we do more projects on AI, some of the concepts in the Act are difficult to exactly delineate, so it takes quite a lot of effort. So let's hope that some practical guidance is going to come out of that. So an interesting question is, what is the UK doing in relation to all that? And the answer is, we're not 100% sure. So I'll keep it very, very short on that particular point. As people may have heard, the UK has a new government as of the summer. The previous policy seems to have stopped. We were expecting an announcement for an AI bill, which could look something like the EU AI Act, but wouldn't be exactly the same as the EU AI Act, but that simply hasn't happened. So at least for this legislative year, there is not going to be legislation, but His Majesty's government has made it very clear that they're going to establish the appropriate legislation. So there will be legislation in the UK at some point. In the meantime, different sectoral regulators are issuing their guidance. Our data protection regulator, the UK Information Commissioner's Office, is running some workshops and sandboxes and has issued some really helpful guidance. And then if you look at other sectors, for example, financial services, the FCA, they're producing guidance. So this is the base on which we're proceeding at the moment. At the same time, the UK, like the United States, is one of these countries that has launched an AI Safety Institute that is focusing primarily on the safety aspects of big foundation models, especially the ones that have potentially significant implications for our economy. And this is going to become a statutory body. So I think I would summarize the UK as watch this space, and it may be a small country compared to the EU or compared to the APAC region, but please keep an eye on what we're doing in the UK, because it's going to be the only country that's starting from GDPR and EU level standards. But our stated mission is to take a more pragmatic approach to compliance to encourage innovation. So watch this space. And on that note, let's travel across the Atlantic. Juanita, I understand there's a lot happening in Latin America, so over to you.
Thank you, Antonis. And yes, there's a lot happening in Latin America because unlike the other regions, our privacy regulations are still very young. So everything is happening at the same time. So in Latin America, we're undergoing a rapid transition from a practically unregulated landscape to a highly regulated one. we can see here on the map that a lot is going on. There's a significant regulatory movement on AI, but there's also a significant regulatory movement regarding data privacy, e-commerce, administrators' responsibility, and digital advertisement on regulated products. So Latin America, having a 650 million population, has nearly 24, 25 countries with a high disparity of regulation. Throughout Latin America, most countries now have recent data privacy regulation, with data privacy being recognized as a constitutional fundamental right. The most active authorities in Latin America are the Brazilian one, the Mexican one, the Colombian one, and today, in fact, Ecuador has a brand new data protection authority that has started working as of today. So that's an interesting insight. What else? Well, the most active authorities you already know. And what is happening in this regulation in Latin America? They are very, very inspired in Europe and the European principles. And as from an AI regulatory perspective, we're seeing two movements: the regional one and the local one, country by country. So as from a regional perspective, two things are going on. The majority of the countries have adopted the Cartagena de Indias Declaration to promote ethical and technical AI governance framework. And second, the Ibero-American Network for Data Privacy has issued a guidance for the use of AI. And why is this interesting? Because the Ibero-American Network for Data Privacy is a forum that aims for the sharing of learnings and knowledge. And the parties to this forum are the DPAs for the different countries, and also stakeholders from the private community, so private sector. So they are aiming to achieve strong and advanced privacy and AI regulation in the region, seeking for a uniformity of the region in the regulatory aspect. So in the local level, we have first a multiplicity of bills of law, as you can see there. Generally, they adopt principles and risk-based approach with a strong accountability duties. Second, countries that are already count with hard law is Peru, only Peru, and Uruguay. Peru having a law promoting the use of AI in favor of social and economic development of the country, and it is based on principles, and they look at human rights, ethical, sustainable, transparent, and responsible use of AI. Uruguay, on the other hand, is accountability type regulation, and it has specific mention to AI governance regulations. Many countries, most of them have adopted recommendations and guidelines based on the OECD principles. And most recently, we are starting to see judicial and administrative decisions on AI-related systems. One of them is the Colombian Constitutional Court that just decided on a case in which a judge used ChatGPT to inform himself about some particularities of what was going to be decided. So the party being affected challenged the fact that the due process was being not met. And well, the court took the opportunity to give some guidelines on that particular point. Lastly, and I think that it was a week or 2 weeks ago, the Colombian and Ecuadorian authorities issued circulars on administrators' responsibility, and some, as in Colombia, well, the Colombian one has potential personal liability. We're still pending to see how that's going to play out. And that's the stage of what we have in Latin America.
Thank you very much, Juanita. That was a very succinct description of what appears to be a very complex picture with regulation at different levels, local, regional. The words personal liability somewhere in there, and that certainly makes the attention of directors and boards focus. But I guess also a clear message that in Latin America, people do tend to take inspiration from the European approaches, by which I assume we mean the EU approaches. So thank you very much. Really interesting picture there, Juanita. And then last but not least, let's move up north in the United States and Canada. I think, Todd, quite a lot happening there. And actually, I think, to be technically correct, I think it wasn't the EU AI Act that was the first AI law that came into force online. I think it was the Colorado AI Act. So what is happening in the United States and Canada?
Well, as we move north in the Americas, it's tempting to say, and now for something completely different, because we are taking a radically different approach than the EU and many other regions. I think that what you see in the US is a dual desire to really foster an atmosphere to encourage the development of AI. It's very clear that the United States wants to be a leading market for AI for the development. So there's a lot of care taken to avoid regulation that might inhibit the development of this technology. And the other complicating factor that you have is, as I'm sure most are aware, the politics in the US at the moment are very fractious. And so even where you might otherwise have bipartisan agreement on specific issues, it's very difficult to get agreement between the parties for evenly split legislatures to even pass any legislation, which is why I think that you see a lot of the most consequential actions actually coming in the form of guidance, and it comes through various different agencies. So you have NIST that's put out AI guidance, you have the FTC that's put out guidance, and then you have executive actions. And the executive actions are very interesting because while they can't pass statutes, they can influence all the federal government, and they can also distribute revenues or distribute funding that's made available to them by Congress. And that's why I think that you see some of the most important actions taking place actually through executive orders, where the President Biden has taken steps to instruct the agencies to take specific actions with respect to AI, and actually to work with industry. So you've seen a number of initiatives where the US government has worked hand in hand with some of the biggest developers of AI products and services to influence where AI goes in the future. You've got the Bill of Rights, you've got the Multinational Agreement on AI Security, you've got the AI Safety Institute, the AI Safety Consortium, a lot of multinational, regional actions being led through the executive branch. So when it comes to legislative action, at the federal level, again, right now, the House is currently controlled by the Republican Party, and it's a very tight split, and you've got splits even within the party, and you've got the Senate controlled, well, it's basically evenly split. With the presidential election this year, you also could see the balance of the House changing back to Democrat, and honestly, the Senate going back to Republicans. So it's hard to say that even though there are many, many federal bills pending that have really strong bipartisan support, it's hard to see which will make it through both houses and then get signed by the executive branch. So that's why you see most of the action taking place in the states. So you've got bills pending in 45 states right now, and laws or resolutions enacted in 31, including, for example, Antonis, Colorado. And Colorado is interesting because Colorado did take a more European approach and really focus on the high risk and consequential actions. And it's sort of an outlier, and it doesn't come into effect until 2026. And it's possible that it may even get amended before then, because again, it's a little bit out of line with where the rest of the states, the rest of the country is going. You had several laws passed in California, and it made it to the governor's desk. And the governor did not sign the one that was viewed as the most important, that was more like Colorado and more like the EU approach. So I think that you'll continue to see leadership in the States because it's easier to get action through. But I think that what you'll see is a focus on mainly transparency. And rather than AI as a technology, I think that what you're going to see more of a focus on, even though they'll call it AI, is automated decision making. That seems to be what the US is most concerned about, which I think is a little bit different. So even though you'll see a bill that talks about AI in the title, when you actually dig into it and you see what they're focused on, it's really automated decision making. So we could get into a lot more detail, but so that we can keep moving with our program, I'll wrap it up there.
Perfect. Thank you, Todd. So again, I think I'm hearing a lot of complexity even in the United States, which usually is more light touch when it comes to tech and data regulation. And as the world moves from, effectively, as Bonita said, virtual lack of regulation of technology, except for the personal data piece, the privacy laws and all that stuff. We're now moving to a world where technology and data, all data, not just personal, is becoming regulated. And with this emerging patchwork of laws and regulations around the world and even within the same regions, it is a bit difficult to stay on top, let alone take consistent approaches to compliance. Although, and of course, there's the rest of the world. Niamh, if you can flick to the next slide, please, very, very quickly, just so our colleagues can get a sense of what happens elsewhere. And of course, we have a plethora of what I call transnational soft law developments, like principles and guidance that is out there. So it's a bit difficult to stitch everything together and get the collective picture, and this is why we have global law firms like Dentons to help our clients stay on top of developments, but also try to make sense and try to derive the common principles. That's one of the good things about this development, that there are common principles that we can look at, things like transparency and explainability, privacy, security, repeatability, human in the loop, and so on and so forth, that we can perhaps distill. But the more interesting question becomes, as the economy is running to adopt AI, okay, we can distill common principles from legal and regulatory frameworks. But what does market practice look like? Can we similarly see common threads in market practice around the world? And to help us address that question, we will turn to our other experts in the panel. So let's start with procurement. Let us explore this question in relation to procurement. Dan and Giangi, let's start with Europe, please. What are you seeing in practice? Is AI procurement any different than any other good old-fashioned technology procurement? What are some of the key issues we typically encounter in practice, and what governance steps should our clients be implementing? Dan, how about we start with you?
Thanks, so I think that the issues that we have on a traditional IT procurement, I think, those ways, many of them seem to have been to the gym for a while and turned up in different clothing in AI. They are much stronger. They have much deeper implications than I think they do in, if I can say, more traditional technology procurements. But obviously, one of the challenges to AI is there's such a variety of things. I'll try and pick up some of the themes there. But just to pick sort of some of the things I think are influencing not only the transactions themselves, but also the political surrounds the transactions. For technology outsourcing, it's always been the case that companies need to choose what their core expertise is and what they put out of house, knowing that in most cases there's a kind of they need to put in place some sort of exit strategy to move back from that solution or move on to the next generation as something better comes along. And I think that's definitely present in the current sort of approach to AI, in that people are being cautious because it looks like an irreversible step in a way that perhaps technology outsourcing was not. But obviously a cautious step probably doesn't mean that they're going to realize all of the benefits that might have been on offer. And then with that exit strategy stuff, what would it actually look like? It's the question we always ask on again, traditional technology procurements. Have you just, are you aware you just bought a service, and when you end the service, it's gone, and you might choose a different commoditized service? Or is it something where actually you will need to transfer the integrations you have with your wider technology stack, the data that you've personally collected or created through it? Will it need further configuration review? So defining what that exit strategy would look like, and is it something based purely on a promise from someone in the cloud, or is it actually based on hard legal rights to possession from that sort of thing? So you're getting that exit strategy right has always been a part of technology procurement. I think AI, the answers are less obvious. And part of what that makes less obvious is obviously the volatility of the market. It's changing at a phenomenal degree. Whether or not people have signed up for a particular AI service or solution as part of their stack, that is itself evolving every day. The outputs it comes up with aren't necessarily consistent from day to day. So again, it just needs to deal with all of how we address, are you actually outsourcing your lifeblood? Are you making sure that you can retain control over your company? And so forth. I won't go into issues of risk allocation and limits of liability. I think I'm much more focused, I think, on making sure what can we do to make sure the projects strategically succeed around that. And in that case, I think it's also important to understand what use case AI is trying to play within your organization. And here, the marketing around most AI solutions really doesn't help. I think, as Todd mentioned a moment ago, many things claim to be AI tools that really aren't. But if you are buying an AI solution, how are you going to keep control of that? How are you going to make sure that it doesn't expose you to risks that you have? And part of that, again, is structural to the use case. Is this your representative to the outside world or your customers and suppliers? Or is it actually a backroom tool for your existing staff to communicate to those people with better insights or more efficiency? I think, again, being clear about the risk profile for each of the different use cases is terribly important, as well as obviously the compliance issues that will go around that. Gianji, is there anything you want to go on?
Thanks, Dan. By the way, I fully agree, and this is, the approach that is the same approach that is used also elsewhere in Europe. If you want to have a Europe-wide view, but in this discussion we've just had, I would say, in the essence, we do need at the moment practical guidance, and as Chiara was saying at the beginning. There will be more practical guidance, for instance, in Europe through the AI office and the other European institutions. But as it was stated before, we are in a phase of deployment now. Interesting is that in this webinar, finally, we're not discussing the definition of AI. So we've done many webinars discussing what is AI. Now we no longer discuss this because we are at an implementation phase. An implementation phase where, as Antonis noted before, but also Juanita and everyone, and Todd, there are very different approaches to regulation. So what to do? As Dan was saying, we need a strategy to succeed, but also another big question we need to answer, which is how to ensure compliance with the regulatory expectations. So if we were to start in Europe, is that how do we do that? There are a lot of elements we could use. I'll run first to the conclusion to some concrete suggestions, and then we'll go perhaps to a few points if we have a few minutes left. First of all, is having a look at what the authorities have been doing. This is much easier on the data privacy side of it, because there's already a lot of initiatives and guidelines taken by the authorities. So if you are drafting your contract, look at certain guidelines. Two examples, the One European Data Protection Board on 24th of May of this year, and the following initiative of the European Data Protection Supervisors on the 6th of June. You can come up from it with a list of questions, which are exactly the same list of questions you can ask to your AI system provider. Obviously, you may well reduce them. These are the one of the 24th of May of the European Data Protection Board related to the list of questions to OpenAI. You want to somewhat reduce them and adapt it to your actually case, but you can really draw a lot of inspiration as to the questions you want to raise and address in your contract. For instance, what is the legal basis for processing? How to ensure the respect of the principles of fairness, data accuracy? Did you do a DPIA? Can we see a copy of this DPIA? Can you attach a copy of this DTIA to the contract? So these are really a set of basic questions. and also other data protection authorities, for instance, the Bavarian one, but also the Italian one, about how not to be scraped, if, for instance, if you are looking at scraping. And all of these can be translated easily into a contract. But then what about the outside world, the world outside data privacy? Well, we can also draw inspiration in this case from certain work carried out by the EU Commission, in particularly for the AI community, the procurement of AI community. This in turn draws inspiration for a piece of work that's been carried out by the city of Amsterdam back in 2018. The latest version of the clauses is dated September 2023, so it's pretty dated, but actually provides a good set of approach you could use for high-risk AI systems and a different approach for lesser risky AI systems. And just one thing to define for these, one point to take note is, first of all, define what is the intended purpose properly and get a proper representation that this is fine, actually, this system is fine for the intended purpose. Because as we all know, there's no bad technology, but there's a bad usage of such technology for that purpose. Set a warranty that there is an adequate risk management system and a declaration actually that the residual risks are acceptable. So, and the risk management system should define the minimum steps and get appropriate warranties for obviously the data sets that are subject to an appropriate data governance. And then you can refer to what we were stating before with what has been already done at length by the data protection authorities. Get concise, concrete instruction for use and understandable so as to avoid vendor lock-in. Set appropriate measures for record keeping. There's 10 points. We are at the fifth one. I took note of all of them, but we're trying to be as concise as possible.
Please.
Measures for transparency, for human side, accuracy and robustness, a quality management system. These are the main points, obviously. And then assurance as to how you explain the system, how you could explain the system to individuals. And obviously, right to disclose information and address who has the rights to use the data sets, actually who owns them. Are any of the data being transformed? Are they going to be used for training for the benefit of other third parties? And last but not least, these have not been addressed by the AI community, procurement of AI community team at the Commission. There's some additional points that on a personal basis we've seen in the market. One is reputation. There's a big issue with reputation tied with AI, and it has to address with the proper clause, particularly with regard to certain AI operators that are tied, for instance, with government agencies. And another one is insurance. When there's an issue with AI, it's a big issue, it's a big mess. So there should be an appropriate insurance being undertaken and a proper insurance clause. And last point that is very tricky that we are seeing with AI operators and the AI system is audit and allowing also government agencies audits. So these are the main things that will need to be addressed, but there are already certain standards being established and there will be even more through the AI office. I hope I've been in time, Antonio, but we're happy to respond to any question.
You've been spot on time, Giangi and Dan, and thank you very much. There were some very practical suggestions we can discuss towards the end of the session. How many of those actually providers are prepared to provide in practice, because that's where the rubber hits the road, isn't it? But I'm interested, gents, this was amazing, very practical. Thank you very much indeed. So that's what we're seeing in the market in Europe. But I wonder, is it similar in other parts of the world? So maybe Robin and Juanita, you could take 2-3 minutes each, or if you have anything to add. Are you seeing, Robin, why don't you go first? Are you seeing similar things in Australia? Does what Dan and Giangi just told us, is it the same what you're seeing in practice in APAC?
It is. It, it resonates with me. I agree with what both of them said. What struck me though, or what strikes me often in procurement is, one of the things that, lawyers get accused of is, are we using these sort of contractual sledgehammers to crack simple nuts? And so, often, that's where, there's a lot of tension in actually the procurement, which is, we're trying to get as much protection as we can, for example, and then, does that, overkill? And I think a lot of this, in practice, actually, some of that, the thing that would reduce the friction between vendors and people procuring systems would be, around the transparency. So getting details on the specific AI features, their intended purposes, the nature of the training data that's to be leveraged, whether input data, retrains the system, the output data, the level of human oversight, that kind of thing, the data storage and retention protocols, those sort of transparency measures really, and commitments around those are going to help in that negotiation. And, some companies use model cards to explain, transparency and explainability, how the whole thing works and everything like that. And so, basically honing in on, what are the specifications, I think actually will help your procurement, and speed up the negotiation.
Thank you, Robin. Juanita, do these points resonate in Latin America?
They do resonate. I think that people, at least here in Latin America, vendors and people handling procurement are starting to speak all these AI points that Janji and Robin were talking about. They are also very focused on intellectual property on the outputs. I think that that's one thing that they are also focusing on.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Juanita. So look, this is, I guess the key point that's emerging is already we're seeing some common practices, areas that we identify that need attention. Dan, you made some very good points there about, hey, go back to basics. What AI do you think you're procuring? Are you even procuring AI? And what's the problem that you're trying to solve? Exit strategy, couldn't agree with you more. There's increased vendor lock-in risk here. There's increased risk of not being able to port your data, but the problem domain is very, very similar. And also you touched on the volatility, or let's call it velocity problem. Things are evolving so quickly. Providers come and go, products come and go, the tech is evolving. How do you stay on top of all those things? And then Jianji, thank you very much for the very precise and practical recommendations to clients. The key word I got from what you said is draw inspiration from what regulators say, as opposed to follow slavishly the list of clauses that they've done. And between us, let's face it, EU regulators have a very long history of producing extremely long list of terms that no one in the market actually can obtain. So draw inspiration from that. And I think the same applies about all these laws and all these standards that we've looked at for the broader governance piece. So thank you very much for this very insightful conversation. So let's assume for a moment you're past the procurement stage. You gave your wish list to the service provider, they accepted everything, you've signed your contract, you've done your due diligence, you're good to go. So we're now in implementation and use mode. So let me now turn to Todd and Robin to talk us through the issues that we commonly see at the stage of implementation and use. What are the key issues that we see, team, and what governance steps do we typically encourage clients to take? So who wants to go first?
Happy to jump in, because in part I'd like to follow up on something that Juanita said about the procurement, and she was talking about the intellectual property aspects. And I think that as we see litigation continue over this, it's really important to really reconsider how hard you fight for ownership of certain things, whether you're taking a license, whether you're taking a service, because that could end up being a very important part of your risk allocation in your procurement model. Because when the lawsuits come, if you're not the owner of it, if you're not the controller of it, you might have some more effective tools in your toolkit to insulate yourself from some of those lawsuits. But once you have it, I think what we're seeing as a practical matter is it is incredibly important not to view your deployment as a compliance exercise where you're checking off boxes and just trying to meet the mere minimums of regulations. It's critical to look at actual risk. Stop, step back, and look at the types of risk that this use of technology faces for you as an organization. And it will be different for everyone, which is why one size does not fit all. And if you can actually take a pragmatic, realistic look at risk, that also involves knowing your own limitations of what you're able to do and what you might need to outsource, you'll have a much better chance of actually being compliant with a lot of the requirements around. So compliance becomes a matter of getting credit for the good work you've done. And when we think about risk and being practical about risk, the two main areas that I see are changes that happen with the technology that are sort of out of your control over time, and then changes within your organization. So what do I mean by this? What I mean is AI is evolving so rapidly that some AI models might start training on other kinds of data, or it might end up, the models might end up evolving in a way away from your ideal use case that could end up giving you results that you don't need, that's not optimized for what you want. So you have to have a way to ensure over time that your testing, that your vendor or your technology, even if you've made it yourself, is continuing to do what you procured it for. Or if it's evolving and it's evolving in a way that you want, that your deployment, that your systems internally are keeping up with that and matching these new uses. So I consider those types of risks to be risk for input of data and risk for the way the models are evolving over time. Incredibly important. The other big bucket of risk that I see is internally to your organization. Some things that you could see happening are, AI, one of the things that strikes me about AI is sometimes people don't really understand it. So they'll use a hammer when they really need a screwdriver. And what you run the risk over time is that you procure this, Dan and Gianji have given you fantastic advice and you procured exactly the right screwdriver for your needs. And then somebody within the organization needs a hammer, but they start using the screwdriver that you procured for them with outcomes that may not have been predicted, or that may not be good, or that may end up with discrimination or something else because it wasn't tested for that purpose. It's not appropriate for that particular use. So I think it's really important to know your organization, to know how to keep your hands around that use creep, as it were. I think the other thing to really pay attention to is looking at outcomes, making sure you have people who understand what is supposed to be happening with the use of AI. You wouldn't have a doctor go into a surgery with a new medical tool that they don't really quite understand how it works, and they just jump in and say, well, let's see how this turns out. So why would you do that with your business? So if you don't have the capability in-house to have somebody overseeing the outcome, the use, well, then that is where you might rely on third parties who have more of that technological ability to govern for bias, for discrimination, and everything else. So Robin, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure, thank you. I feel like you might be describing my do-it-yourself efforts at home when you're talking about the hammers and the screwdrivers, and possibly that you might have been peaking at some point. So, so let's focus on deployment in particular. So what do we mean by deployment? Well, fundamentally, we really mean that you're moving from a non-production environment, a training or a test environment, to a production environment. So your model's been developed to meet an expected outcome. It performs, in the non-production environment, it's performing at a level that's determined that it's ready for use as a live situation. And so now you've deployed it into your production environment. And so at this point, your model is going to be taking in data that wasn't part of its original training cycle. So it's live. And so it's also going to be integrating that model with your existing enterprise systems. And that's a complex undertaking. And so, the history shows that there's still a large gap between, basically the number of developed algorithms out there and really the number of successful deployments that you see. And that's whether you're deploying AI or whether you're deploying other technology systems, they're often falling short. So it really does need a lot of consideration of a whole pile of factors to ensure there's that, seamless communication between the model and the existing infrastructure, much like every other technology deployment. But, you can see, problems arising at all different stages of deployment. So you're looking at how to integrate it. You're looking to how to plan then for change management to support the transition. You're trying to anticipate, how is it going to work with your apps and your various medias, your updates, your patches, how are you going to do that? And how fast can you actually respond, ensuring that you've got this sort of successful deployment. And so, if, for example, in the model development, you've got a really unclear problem definition, that might be a barrier to your deployment. If, for example, in development, you've got biased data, well, when you're transitioning to production data, maybe there's a drop in the model performance from the test data to the production data that could result from, changes in date formats, timing, context. Context is everything in a deployment. And so, if your model is making it to a deployment phase, then I think that one of the things that will make a difference in successful deployment really is around getting that end user engagement as that facilitator, which can be the barrier to a successful uptake, and making sure that, the end users are really correctly using the deployed product, which is, what Todd is saying is, are you getting this scope creep? Or, are they don't buy into it, there's no trust in it, because they haven't got sufficient interaction with it, they don't understand the context, so those things, that context is really vital in a deployment. The AI is learning from every single interaction. And so, you really want, basically a flexible architecture, that's going to help you integrate it into existing systems, but also get that user buy-in. And so, looking at the output, the data quality that you're getting when you're deploying it, the model drift that you're getting, is it performing even worse over time, let alone, for things that it wasn't designed to do? How frequently are you auditing the model for bias? What are you doing to put mitigation mechanisms in place? Are you even geared up to do that? It's those sorts of things that I think that you've really got to take care of. And, it's no different from other technology deployments. You need robust access controls. You need robust monitoring systems. You've got to really be, regularly auditing and evaluating, the deployment itself.
Yeah, and to build on what you said, Robin, I think it's important for all the reasons you stated, but it's also important from a cultural standpoint that you have this governance with input from everybody, because if you don't do that, you'll never have legal becoming an efficient police force going around trying to look over everyone's shoulders, because what will happen is they inevitably won't have the necessary knowledge about what's going on. There'll be people will run ahead of them. And two, if they're viewed as the people who are always stopping the fun at the party, then people will find ways to hide what they're doing and continue to use it anyway. So from a cultural standpoint, it's really important to have that buy-in, to have that input, genuine input from everybody, not sort of FaceTime. And again, that should help you spot whether you need outside consultants also participating in this exercise, because AI, I think AI has done a real disservice with the name artificial intelligence. I think that some people think that the laws of physics no longer apply. It's not intelligent. It's not sentient. It will never be. I don't care what the alarmists say. It will not. And it's not particularly artificial either. So I think that if you get the right people looking at what you're using, you can catch some of this phenomenon where models can get worse over time. It's like an echo chamber where they start focusing in on themselves and doing things. And that's just the generative AI part. But getting a culture of not a compliance culture necessarily, but more of a success culture where the right people with the right knowledge are having genuine conversations about how this is serving needs or not serving needs, and whether you're taking the steps you need to follow the actual risk will again make it much easier for legal or management to ensure that the guidance and the laws are actually being complied with.
Thank you, guys, very much. I find listening in not just very useful, but also very enjoyable. Robin, thank you for the very practical tips and issues. And there's more that we could be addressing. And Todd, thank you in particular for completely deconstructing AI for us. And it's not artificial, it's not intelligent. Is it even tech? Thank you very much for that. The one thing I will object to, not object, you didn't say to, but just to clarify, I mean, as lawyers and as external advisors, and I think that applies to our clients as well as the people in-house who are going to lead the charge on AI governance, we really don't want to be the people who ruin the party, right? We want to be the people who actually come late, bring the booze, and really give a boost to the party. Because I really think that if we approach this in the right way, it's really difficult. It's a big challenge for all of us. But if we approach it in the right way, we can do a big service to our organizations. Equally, if we approach it the wrong way, either we're overly relaxed about it or overly conservative about it, then we're going to have a negative impact. So thank you very much for that. Again, let's turn now to other parts of the world. So I'll open this up now to let's start with Chiara and Gianji from a European perspective. Any thoughts on what Todd and Robin just said? Any things to add? And then Juanita, I'll come to you towards the end.
Shall I start, Gianji, with some comments? I believe that the EU approach is very much towards what Todd was suggesting. We have talked about it at the beginning of our meeting. The AI office is fostering cooperation among all the stakeholders involved in the AI lifecycle. But at least in Europe and in Italy, also in these days, we are seeing very much, we're seeing a lot of concerns on data. Our privacy authority in particular is very much active in AI, and the focus in terms of both provision and deployment of AI is very much on data in Europe and in Italy, of course. And with data and AI comes the data scraping issue. Another focus point here in Europe is on literacy, on training, on awareness, on internal governance in terms of guidelines. Companies in Europe started very early in implementing internal guidance on how to use AI, on how to benefit from AI, and how to limit risk and foster trust in AI. So if I have to identify two trends in Europe, I would say data and literacy.
Thank you, Chiara.
Thanks, Chiara. Just to add
points.
on that, as you said, Antonis, EU sometimes regulators tend to, really like their role and write a lot. So let's say, if we are to look at the trend, is that in the EU there might be a reverse in that trend. There's been recently the Draghi report, who actually noted and said, in Europe there's more than 100 laws with a focus on technology, and there's more than 270 regulators actually having a say on these technology matters, and indirectly also with regards to AI. So the drive will be based on that report, and it's funny enough, this is from the one of the head of a central bank that normally love regulations, is to try and simplify as much as possible.
And former Italian Prime Minister, if memory serves, Gianji.
Yes, of course. His CV is a very long one, but it did have some more persuasion on the current commission. Actually, it has been commissioned by Ursula von der Leyen. So the expectation now is that it will be put into practice. There will be some forms of simplifications, and the buzzword is help the business to thrive. And we are also well aware that from a technology perspective in AI in Europe, other geopolitical blocks are guiding. So regulation should not be something that actually makes this competition even harder. So we will see more guidelines, but the real challenge would be, as Chiara was saying, the gold plating from the local data protection authorities, as we all know.
Thank you both very much. Look, Gianji, so Chiara, just to start with you, actually, I think I summarize this as it's all about the data when you start looking not just at what regulators expect, but also Robin made the point earlier. It's also in an operational sense. You want to make AI work. Let's leave developers aside, but you're a customer, you want to procure AI. The model will be the model. The math will be the math. The question that's going to determine the success of your use is going to be the data. So that's clearly a very, very, very essential point. And then training and awareness, I think that's a universal principle that we should all be following. You need to be raising awareness within organizations. Gianji, to your point, I really hope you're right. I really hope that the Gianji report is going to turn the tide when it comes to the way in which the EU has been approaching regulation of technology, of data, of digital, the whole piece, right? It's become possibly the highest regulated area in the EU at the moment. And as you say, some very powerful competitive forces there. Before I summarize the other very useful points that Todd and please, Todd, and then I'll go to Juanita.
One thing to add on that we didn't mention, Rob and I didn't mention, was even if you're doing everything exactly the right way, it's still of critical importance to have a framework that's documented where you can record your decisions of what you've done along the way for protection, because regulators tend to have 20/20 vision in hindsight. So if something starts to go wrong or something accuses you of something, and you go to the regulator and say, yeah, well, we discussed that and we viewed the risks as being like this, that's why we took the following steps, but you didn't record it. You run the risk of the regulator claiming that that's a post hoc rationalization and that you actually weren't doing anything at all. So even though it seems like the lawyers and outside counsel are always talking about document, it is important. It's important so that you can go back and look and make sure that you're not drifting into areas that you didn't intend to drift into, and that when you have conversations with third parties, whether through litigation or regulatory investigations, you have a basis upon which you can rely for your conversations.
Todd, may I ask you a very quick question, please? What you just said, so document for operational reasons and also for accountability reasons, with which I agree, and I'm pretty sure the entire panel agrees 100% is a core recommendation. Is this an explicit requirement of any US laws at the moment, or any of this guidance, or is this just a practical recommendation that you make from what you're seeing in practice?
You can argue that it is a requirement, but it's not as explicit and clear as it should be. And best practice would be to overdo it on this point. And I'll give you a good reason why. Take NIST. NIST, in essence, when it comes to data security and AI, says, look at your risks, look at your assets, and allocate your assets in accordance to magnitude of risk, which means if you do this correctly, it means you've allocated less assets to smaller risks. Well, if you experience a problem with the smaller risk, arguably you've done everything exactly right according to NIST, because the fact that you only had a small problem was because you focused on the right things. You didn't have a big problem. Yet, in our experience, some regulators look at that and flip it on its head. So if you have the documentation to show that logical framework of decision-making, you're better able to protect yourself against the accusation that you weren't doing enough.
Thank you, Todd. And well, sorry for putting you on the spot like this, but then again, that's what our clients do. They ask us questions, they put us on the spot. So I didn't feel sorry for you at all. The reason why I asked the question is because certainly some of our colleagues in the audience, also the Europeans among us, we know about the big accountability principle in the EU under GDPR, also now under this emerging legal framework on technology and AI. You know, document, not enough to be compliant. You have to be able to demonstrate it. But I think the fact that you mentioned and you brought it out in this very clear way, without it being an explicit requirement of laws, proves that point that we're all trying to get our head around, that at the end of the day, if you're a global organization and you really want to do a single procurement of AI for your region or the world, at the end of the day, you almost have to remove yourself from strict local legal requirements and try to identify principles, common things, good practices, best practices that you're going to implement globally. And on that note, Juanita, I previewed that I'd come to you 2 or 3 times, but finally I will come to you. Anything to add, whether from a Latin perspective or from a broader practical perspective, on what we heard from the rest of the team?
Thank
And
you,
then I'll
Anton.
finish with Dan.
Thank you, Antonis. I don't think that I have a lot to add because you have all said it splendidly. I think that I would underline the word permanent audit, documentation, showing that you're doing what the documents say, trainings. And I think that's something that we haven't said yet, is that we need to have a map on whether any extraterritorial effect is going to be applicable on what we're doing. And that's super difficult, but I think that we should keep an eye on that.
It's not super difficult. If you do it for the EU AI Act, pretty much everything will be caught if there's any connection to the EU whatsoever. Dan, last but not least, anything to add on what we heard? Obviously, you focused on the procurement when we started. I shall give the last word to you. Anything to add on the deployment and use side?
I think on the deployment and use side, I think that we've heard a lot of reasons how difficult it is to do individually. I think there's probably 2 points to make in relation to that. The first of all is, if you don't do it, don't be sure your staff won't. At the early stages of cloud computing, people were expensing, in financial institutions, were expensing all sorts of things just on a credit card bill, and the organizations lost total control of what they were doing because they wouldn't make the functionality that people actually wanted available for their job available through their job. So, the leakage outside the balloon is, there's a direct choice to be made, and not making the choice on your own AI solution may well lead to its own consequences.
So it's the shadow AI problem, right?
Be
Very much like we
aware,
had
yeah,
shadow
so-
IT, shadow mobile, shadow cloud. Now we definitely have a shadow AI problem that needs to be managed.
If I may make another point, one of the things that, is that a deployment governance environment is different from a procurement governance environment or framework. And so, one of the things that often, people turn their minds to in deployment is, do you need a human in the loop? And if you do, how is that going to work? How is that sustainable over the long run? And so, that's something that you need to be turning your mind to. Is that actually part of your implementation plan and the expense of that? And then the last thing I want to talk about is really the relevance of, the various standards like NIST that, Todd mentioned, or the ISO certifications, related to AI and other technologies. This is often a really important commercial issue, to maintain those or be able to actually keep those in place or to go for those, shoot for those, because, your own customers are requiring those. So in deployment and in use, that's actually where the rubber meets the road, when you're achieving those standards or not. And so back to the documentation point, documentation is crucial to maintaining certifications or obtaining certifications. You cannot get there without, good, robust, comprehensive documentation.
Thank you, Robin. So I think you're effectively saying your AI governance framework needs to have separate considerations, separate parts, as it were, for the procurement, for the deployment, for the use. Common principles, but manifested in a slightly different way to express the particular activity that we're dealing with at the time. So, team, thank you very much. This was a very engaging conversation. I've taken like 3 pages of notes, and I hope that our clients have found it equally helpful. One thing we're not doing very well with is questions or comments from our clients. So everyone who's participating, if you have questions for our panelists or any experiences that you would like to share, please share them in the chat room. Niamh, not sure if you've received any. If not, then maybe I'm going to take good advantage of this and actually ask a question or two that I had. So as our clients are thinking, again, please, any question whatsoever would be most welcomed. So, as I said, I have a couple of questions. Let us start with a very simple one. At the beginning of this session, we just talked our clients through in 20 minutes. I didn't count, to be honest, but probably we referenced around 100 laws, regulations, standards, things that are coming in, changes, updates, whatever. Do we have any suggestions for our clients as to how they can even stay on top of all these developments? Hopefully with some role for Denton somewhere in there, but also equally, if there are clients out there looking at this and thinking, oh my God, this is happening around the world, how do I have a say in this? How do I try to influence that environment? Do we have any recommendations for our clients? So let's start with the how do you stay on top thing. Any suggestions from the team?
I think one of the things that's worth investigating in any contractual negotiation is the extent to which the supplier, who presumably wants to stay in the general AI market, is prepared to take that change of law risk off you. It's very different from saying the supplier will comply with law, well, like they had a choice, but actually to make sure their product and serving meets your certain defined statutory requirements as those change over time. Because if they've got, say, a UK client base, or if they have an Italian client base, they're going to, if they want to stay in the market, their general propositions needs to catch up with that. And they obviously are providing at a scale that most individual customers won't trail.
Dan, I suspect many of our clients may actually, their ears may have raised from what you said and may be very interested in this. What does a term like that look like?
I think it comes at two different levels, really. The ones where you're trying to preserve specific output, it's much easier to work out whether the levels of that output change. So, for example, I've done projects for utility companies where, believe this or not, the billing regulations change on an almost 2-weekly basis. So the need to keep up with the law to produce those statements is a phenomenal drain of effort. And it's better handled by a single technology company servicing multiple utilities than it is at the center. And they bear that risk themselves inside the charge. Or alternatively, where they have to do the change work themselves, even if there is a charge, it's shared throughout a large community to do that. It's more difficult where what you've taken is a general system, or more difficult to persuade, where you've taken a general system and it's the specifics of your utilization of that is causing the problem.
Interesting, very interesting. Team, any other thoughts? Todd, you've unmuted.
Yeah, I think that it really depends on how many resources you have internally as a client, right? If you have a big department, then you can try to divide and conquer. If not, I think it's important to work with other people like Denton's and really focus on the themes and the goals of what these legislations are trying to do, because you may or may not be able to match the letter of each and every requirement, but it's super important to really try to focus in on the main themes, because that's likely to cause you more of a problem. And then on one quick note before I turn it back, we are in the process of launching a global coalition that will be focused on privacy, data security, and AI. And we have coverage around the world. And I think that stay tuned for 2025. And if you're interested, reach out to your contact and we can fill you in with details.
Thank you very much, Todd. Thanks for keeping it short, because I think we had a raised hand in the audience and hopefully a question. AJ, I can see you've lowered your hand now. Is there a question that you would like to ask? If so, please unmute or put it in the chat. Alternatively, we'll continue the conversation.
Thanks, Anthony, and thanks panel. It was a great discussion. Thanks for sharing a lot of insight. Like one thing that I wanted to understand is like when we're looking at the AI regulations, as you guys were pointing out, like according to the jurisdictions, according to the countries, according to the areas, there are different laws that is getting encapsulated at this point of time. So like from an organization standpoint like yours, like how are you like looking to consolidate all of this and look at from an international organization standpoint? Any thoughts of yours there to the panel? Thank you.
Thank you, AJ. Not a simple question to answer. Tim, who wants to go first? I'm happy to have a start if you prefer.
I'm happy to have just a preliminary comment. One of the things I was going to mention is often we have clients that, obtain horizon scanning tools from us. That at least gets them an understanding of the lie of the land. But that's really a basic requirement. The requirement, what you're actually asking, AJ, is how do you comply? And I think that the strategy is no different from essentially what we've got with the proliferation of privacy and cybersecurity laws around GDPR. Some clients decide GDPR is the high watermark, and it's too hard to worry about everything all around the world, and I'm just going to go for the high watermark, and that should get me out of trouble in most jurisdictions. Some, it's like, well, I'm not going to do more than I actually need to in a jurisdiction, even if there's a higher watermark overseas, because, this is a cost solution, that we can't afford. And so our clients are deploying their compliance strategies in different ways according to their needs. But, the actual need to keep up, it's very difficult, which is, why, I think that some effort is now probably turning to some of the key people who are, in global companies about what can we do to get some kind of rationalization, because we're just seeing a proliferation of non-harmonized laws at the moment. And really the key strategic issue is there isn't any kind of rationalization, and it's too hard, and half the laws have got extraterritorial reach anyway, and it's just too hard. So I'll just pause there because others will have some views on that too.
Thank you, Robin. Tim, anything to add very, very briefly? I think, AJ, you asked the money question here. And unfortunately, we're running out of time, but building on what Robin just said, it is the way to do it essentially is you look at the key laws that apply to you, you look at the standards that apply to you, and from there you go to identifying principles from which you derive effectively your own global rules. Where exactly you're going to land, and as Robin was saying, are you going to just apply EU AI Act globally because it's the highest standards? Great, you achieve a high degree of compliance even where you don't need to, but then you're slowing down innovation and implementation because of all the requirements that you're applying. Or are you going to take a more nuanced, balanced approach? I think actually this should be the topic of a dedicated session where we actually deep dive into this. And AJ, if you'd like us to answer your question in a bit more detail, please feel free to get in touch, and I'm sure we'd be happy to arrange a quick chat with you to talk things through. Right, we have 1 minute to go. I was intending to summarize the whole piece. We don't have time. We're respectful of your very busy schedule, but there were some very interesting insights that came out of this session. I'd like to thank all our panelists around the world for their excellent contributions. We hope that you find this very useful. I hope that, like me, you took 2.5 or 3 pages of notes. Niamh, back to you to wrap us up.
I would like to say a big thank you to everyone for joining us today. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to our panel for being with us at all different times of the day and night to bring and deliver today's session to you, for taking us around the world in 90 minutes, and for the time, thought and consideration they put into today's session. We would love to know what you thought of us. Drop us a note in the chat now, or I just popped in our little email address also. We have lots of great sessions coming up over the coming weeks and months. Let me just give you a quick share of that. Just 2 seconds. Let me give you a quick view if I can. No, it's not going to give me. So I'm going
Niamh,
technology.
Perfect. Because you exemplified the best possible way. AI will malfunction, things will go wrong, and that's where you need key
I
governance.
think that's been my purpose today, Antana. So we're going to leave it there. Exactly. So, and we are looking forward to seeing everyone back with us over the coming months. Thank you for joining us today. That concludes our session. We hope you have a great day.